Hello, and welcome to Chin Hairs and F Bombs Conversations with Girlfriends. I'm SallyAnn Gray, and today I'm having a conversation with my friend Kim. We are going to talk about something hard. We're going to talk about depression. And I hope that Kim and I are able to bring some lightness to this conversation because I know it's hard for people to talk about and it is hard for people to listen to. But I think it's important to both Kim and I to bring this out of the shadows because it impacts so many lives, including both of ours, and people that we love and people we have lost. So if you've tuned in, hey, thanks for being here. I'm going to kind of explain this podcast a little bit. This is just the second episode. So thank you for being here. Truly, really, in this podcast, I just talk with a girlfriend about something that's important to us. I want it to feel like you are sitting down with a friend. And I hope that you walk away from this feeling less alone. I hope you walk away from this feeling better and seen and normal, whatever that means. Let's start by introducing Kim. So, Kim Lloyd, tell us about yourself, please.
Sure. First of all, thank you so much for having me on your podcast, and definitely for inviting me to talk about the subject that I think is not. It's talked about more than it was when we were growing up, and
Mhm.
still not enough. So I live in Maine, but if anybody who meets me within the first 30 seconds, you always know that I'm from Pittsburgh. So I'm originally from Western Pennsylvania. I kind of lived all over the place and ended up in Maine. And I've been here longer than I've lived anywhere else, except for my parents' house. Actually, I've been here for coming up on 14 years. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning is I've started to use the word textured to describe my background because it's better than scattered. So I had 29 jobs before I landed on the career that I have now. It took me that long to find my vocation. And so I currently work as an online personal trainer and nutrition coach. So I do some coaching in person, but most of the work that I do is through kimlloydfitness.com, which is my website. And it gives me the opportunity to work with people from all over. I try to coach from a very holistic place. Of course, it's physical health, it's nutritional health, but as I like to say to a lot of clients, you can't pull on one string without getting a whole ball of yarn sometimes. And
Mhm.
so try to really bring a holistic approach to it. I'll
So,
get
the way that Kim and I know each other, we met each other professionally. I made her website.
Yes, if you visit kimlloydfitness.com, that is the handiwork
Yeah.
of Sal.
And getting to know each other through that project, I hired Kim to be my personal trainer, and I am fit as shit now. Uh,
You are
I'm
fit-ish. I love that. Yes.
I started lifting weights with Kim a year and a half ago, and I feel really strong. I'm 43 and I feel like a badass. But out of those professional origins, I feel like we've become friends. I consider you a friend, Kim.
Absolutely. Yes, likewise. Absolutely.
Yay. I'm so glad.
Yes, me too.
So, something I wanted to say before we get talking, I wanted to put a disclaimer out here for our listeners that Kim and I are not doctors. So, we are truly just talking about our personal experiences here. And if you need help, if you are feeling hopeless, please, please ask for help. Please take steps towards getting help. In the show notes, I'm going to link to some resources for people that might need that. Courage is asking for help.
Yes.
I also wanted to include trigger warning. We are going to talk a little bit about suicide. And if that's something that is a really sensitive topic for you, you might want to skip this episode and take care of yourself instead. How about that? Do something nice for yourself instead of listening to this. All right. I would love to get started. Let's do some talking here. I wanted to start by talking about trauma because for me, depression and trauma are linked. I know when I first started on my depression journey, which started when I was 16 years old, the common thought was that there was a chemical imbalance in my brain. Like that's what causes depression. That's the only answer. That's the only answer I was getting from the people I was talking with. And therefore, you take medication to fix that. It wasn't until later in my life that I realized how much trauma I had actually endured as a child. So many of us grow up and we think our normal is normal. And then maybe after a while, you learn that wasn't normal. It wasn't okay. So through learning more about trauma, I realized I think a lot of my depression was caused by trauma. I find a really helpful guide is something called the ACEs score. It's adverse childhood experiences. I learned about this from a therapist. This little quiz counts the number of adverse childhood experiences that you had before the age of 18, and it measures toxic stress. And it's not it is scientific, it is not perfect. And so the 3 major things that it looks at and the questions are about focus on physical and emotional abuse, physical and emotional neglect, and household dysfunction. Once I had a therapist that introduced me to this and I took the quiz, I learned that I have an ACEs score of 5. And if you're not familiar, that's high, unfortunately. And when you get over the score of 4, it hugely impacts your physical health for the rest of your life. That is pretty amazing how much it can impact you. So it's not just the behaviors that you exhibit later in your life, including lack of physical activity. You're more likely to smoke, you're more likely to have alcoholism, drug use, absentee at work. But the physical impacts, obesity, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, stroke, you are wildly more likely to have those impact the rest of your life. And on the mental health side, it's depression and it's suicide attempts. So that is one measure of looking at those traumas at that early age. But one of the failings of the ACEs score is that it primarily looks at big T traumas and not little t traumas. And what that means is a big T trauma is going to be like being sexually abused. In other instances, it's going to be like a natural disaster. These things, these big T traumas give us PTSD. The little t traumas are not to be discredited. And that is having kind of smaller traumas frequently. And they are impactful. And a bunch of little t traumas give you CPTSD, which is complex PTSD, which I suffer from. Kim, tell us about your experience with trauma.
What's interesting is before we started recording is that I had not seen this particular test before, and I took it, and my score was relatively low. I think I basically had a 1. And one of my comments to you was that in my personal individual case, one of my greatest struggles around depression was, and my diagnosis was what they used to call dysthymia, but now they
Mm,
call it chronic low level depression. So, and it can be interrupted by major, bouts of major depression, which I've
mhm.
had a couple of those as well. But primarily, it has been that chronic low level depression. And what I couldn't figure out is like I thought my life was good enough, and so I had no reason to be depressed. Was
Oh,
one of the right? Like, because 'cause you're like, "All
yes.
right, I was not physically harmed, and, my parents, didn't swear at me." So you look at some of those things like that, and you're like, "Okay, well, I was provided for, and so I didn't have a reason to be depressed." And
Mm-mm.
the other challenge I had is, like, what does depression look like?
Mhm.
And what's so it's funny when I have a teacher, we got to know each other and to be friends as an adult, and she told me because she was someone who suffered from depression, and she was like, I wish I would have said something because I recognized it in you when you were in middle school." And I can remember drawing a piece of artwork. So we had to draw a word, right? Like, so take a word and draw it. And I thought it was really clever, but in retrospect, a cry for help. But I
Oh.
took the word depressed and I made a big D at the beginning and then the big D at the end. and then everything in the middle was smaller, and my play on it was that it was depressed, like you would press on the words, but each of the D's had an eye and had tears coming out of them. I was like 13,
Oh,
right? I was 13 years old.
oh.
So, so I know that it was there, but my struggle really for a long time was just assuming you said it really well. We just assume our normal is the norm, right? And
Mhm,
so because I did fine in school, I was really good at sports. I functioned. I thought depression was complete and total non-functioning. I
mm,
didn't think there was any in between. I thought if I'm getting up and showing up to my life, then I'm not depressed. And it took until I was 25 years old the first time I finally said yes to medication.
mm,
I was really resistant to it because I just in I don't know if this is still the case, but I know for me it was assuming that I could just pull myself up by the bootstraps and do better and feel better.
yeah.
That idea that it was like, okay, effort equals results. And
Ugh,
that message served me really well in things like sports and school. Effort equals
yeah.
results. But when it came to solving the way that I was feeling in my enjoyment and any kind of joy I was getting out of life, that formula didn't work anymore, that effort plus results, and so it
Mm,
took medication to really, kind of jump that hurdle a little bit. I think the other thing that I learned through years of therapy was that withholding of things, like withholding of emotional support, it might be very unintentional, but if you have a parent or a caregiver who unintentionally withholds this connection with you, that
mm.
can be, one of those examples of a little T.
Yes, absolutely. Well, I've learned more about childhood emotional neglect, and that can happen with a wonderful, loving parent. But if a parent is distracted, if a parent is struggling with substance abuse or mental illness, which both of those were cases in my life, you might be emotionally neglected in those cases.
Mhm.
And I really appreciate what you said about, like, what does depression look like? You thought it looked different. I remember when I was about 18 or 19, I was with 2 of my best friends, and I was going through a depressive episode, and they were not trying to other me or anything, but they were like, "I just don't understand why you're not happy or your life is beautiful."
Mhm.
And that is true. I have had a lot of wonderful things in my life. It is also true that I was depressed. And to someone who hasn't been through depression, it is really hard to grasp. It is really hard to grasp why someone just can't choose to be happy. And that is a really isolating feeling as well, to not feel understood, because that's what that is.
Yeah, it's that sense of, and I'm glad you said that choosing to be happy. For somebody who doesn't understand it, the question is, why can't you?
Mhm.
It's just, right? It's just a
Oof.
choice. Why can't you why can't you choose, or why are you not choosing to be happy
Ooh.
as though that's your intention? Again, that's people who have the best of intentions,
Yeah.
around having these conversations, but unfortunately, it's not that straightforward. And when you hear the message enough, again, that's the shame and
Mhm.
blame. It's
Yeah.
like, oh, I'm just not trying hard enough. If only I
Right.
could just, I could choose this. And why can't I flip that switch for myself? And for me, I
Yeah.
know medication, I realize it's not necessarily for everybody, but it went a long way in helping me flip that switch a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, medication is a tool. It's one of the tools that I've used over the years for sure, still do. Something that really spoke to me when I learned about it in psychology in college is Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Hmm.
The bottom of the hierarchy is a roof over your head, it's food in your belly. And I had that. Yep. Yep, for sure. Did. Nailed it. You move up that pyramid, you move up the hierarchy of needs, and the next thing is safety.
Hmm.
And I didn't have that. I didn't feel
Hmm.
safe. My childhood home was chaotic and
Hmm.
scary, and I was around adults who weren't okay. They were not okay. And so that is another way of looking at this, like, "Oh, well, your life was great." It's like, "Okay, Yeah, did I have parents that could pay for me to go to college? I feel very fortunate that I did. That's privilege. Did I feel unconditionally loved? Did I feel important? No, I didn't.
Mhm. It's that and I talk with clients about this all the time in around many topics, but it is they both and that two
Yes.
things can be true at once. And that's exactly what you're saying is that you're
Yeah.
like, okay, these things can be true. I can be provided for and still have struggles around the depression.
And as we both touched on, from the outside, everything might look fine, and you look ungrateful. A lot of judgment can come from that with a lack of understanding.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree.
So, I'd like to talk a little bit about your depression history, my depression history. You touched on it. Thanks for sharing. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, absolutely. When I was in college, I took a number of depression tests, like the sort of self indicators, and I would take them, and the information always came back the same. It always came back that I should seek a professional, and it took me a long time to do that. But one of my descriptions for my experience with depression was that you imagine that you grabbed a sheet of paper and you drew a line right through the middle of it. And that line was quote unquote normal. And
Mm,
so if you had a high, your high would be above the line. If you had a low, your low was below the line. And then sometimes you're right on the line, right? Status quo. I experienced highs and lows, but they were not on that line. They were underneath it. And so my highs were not very high and my lows were incredibly low. So there was still a fluctuation where times felt better than others. But what I didn't know was that life could be lived above that line as well. I had no idea. I thought that that was just everybody's experience. And so it was when I started working with a therapist. I think she was like, I think you're depressed and I think that medication is a good next step for you. And as I mentioned, I was really resistant to it because I thought I would be able to solve it. And what stood out to me was when I finally said yes and I took the medication and I met with my doctor and we found the right dose, which is another part of this journey is
yes.
when you do say yes to medication, finding the right kind of medication and the right dose. And if you're out there now and you're going through this process, I just it's really hard, but be patient with the process. It can be really time consuming. But once I got on the right dose of medication, I actually kind of got my act together. And so I mentioned that I had 29 jobs. So I was spinning my wheels a lot right after college. And I had wanted to go to graduate school. And so I finally got my act together to take the GREs, to apply to graduate school. I got accepted and I picked up and I moved to New Mexico.
Wow.
But then I stopped taking the medication, and that is also not uncommon. So sometimes medication can be used just to kind of get you over a hump. And so it was actually just really striking to me how I was able to, with the help of medication, get out of my head and make some things happen. And
Wow.
so I went off the medication. I moved to New Mexico, and I ended up with a major depressive episode. And some of the things that I experienced was a lot of self-doubt, a lot of negative self-talk. I was working as a teaching assistant. I was like, I'm not very good at this. I'm not a good teacher. And then I was a writing student. So my graduate degree was supposed to be a master in fine arts, so master in creative writing. But I was really doubting worth, whether I should be there. I really struggled to concentrate. I didn't want to be around people at all. So I was isolating myself a lot and and at that point I couldn't have recognized it as a major depressive episode and I was not working with a therapist.
Mm.
um, but I ended up actually quitting school. I ended up walking
Oh,
away from the TA position and I left after one semester and I didn't recognize it at the time, but it was 100% fueled by that major depressive episode. I was consuming alcohol in a bigger quantity, right, which is a depressant, which doesn't help. But I was
mm,
just, doing all of these things, and ultimately, it's one of the shoulds. We all have some in our life, and I should have quotes around it had my MFA by the time I was 26 years old, and instead, I didn't finish a graduate degree until I was actually 34 years old. It took working with a therapist, and it took a therapist convincing me, and also I mentioned that the teacher, I emailed with her back and forth about medication, and she was like, "If you were diabetic, you would take this medication," right? It's that when you start to really think about it that way, you're like, okay, you need to think about what you're struggling with as a health issue,
It's a medical
not
condition.
yes, and you need to think about it that way, and if you had some other medical condition, if you're sick and you needed, penicillin, you wouldn't say no to the antibiotic because that's what it takes to treat it, but the
Right.
stigma that is around the mental health side of it and the seeking for help, you said at the beginning, it takes courage to ask for help, because you're also admitting when you take medication, you're like, "Yes, this is true about me," which is for
Mm,
me, was another part of that phase of understanding, recognizing, identifying, and then accepting that this was part of who I was and trying to figure out how to work with that.
right, saying it out loud makes it true.
Yes. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Well, and another complicating factor is depression is an invisible disability,
Mhm.
and so others don't see it, and we don't give it the weight or value that it deserves based on the impact that it makes in our lives and the people's lives around us, truly.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point too. And like you said, when people look and you're functioning,
Mm,
you're functioning and they perceive you functioning at a high level because what are they know,
right,
right? Like
right.
they don't know how much you're struggling on the inside,
Yeah.
you know?
You touched on something that I really struggled with in the last couple years, which is executive dysfunction.
Mhm.
So, when you were not able to make it through that post-grad degree, you were suffering from some executive dysfunction, the ability to concentrate, like you said. I struggled with executive dysfunction in the last couple years, and I had to take a break from work because of it.
Yeah.
It was impacting my life hugely. My working memory, my emotional reactivity, ooh, bad.
Mm.
Flexibility in thinking, my processing speed, self-motivation, hello, problem solving, like, so many executive dysfunction symptoms that I was struggling with, and I had to learn to give myself a break because my capacity, like you were talking about that line
Mhm.
where other people's normal might be, my capacity was decreased.
Mhm.
I could not do the things that I used to be able to do. I could not do things that I thought looked easy for everybody else, which is a bit of a
Yes.
lie that I was telling myself,
Mhm.
but I am an overachiever.
Mhm.
I'm trying not to be. My standards for myself were too high, and I was not giving myself a break. Can we talk about negative self-talk,
Oh,
please?
wow. Yeah. It's exactly what I was thinking. It's that
Right.
what are you saying to yourself?
It was before I started therapy, but I was working out with a personal trainer. Every session was like therapy. I was really using a lot of negative self-talk at that time in
Mhm.
my life, and I also was kind of using it as armor.
Yes.
I do the self-deprecating
I was
humor
gonna
thing.
say, there it is. It masks
Yeah.
itself like that a
Yeah.
lot.
Right? I think I'm being cute and really I'm just
Mhm.
being awful. Like, no
Really, I'm just
one.
making fun of myself. Yeah.
Yes. No one else would talk to me that way. No one else should talk to me that way, and neither should I. So I had really bad negative self-talk, and I was talking to her, and I was like, "Oh, I'm such an asshole." And she goes, "Be nice to my friend Sally."
Yes.
And I tattooed that on my heart
Mhm.
because, yeah, I should be nice to my friend Sally. I think all of us need to be nice to our friend, insert your name here.
Mhm.
Well, so my history with depression, I was able to plot. I've had 5 major depressive episodes since I was a teenager,
Wow.
and my first one was when I was 16, and it was 100% driven by a traumatic event.
Mm.
And unfortunately, in my family, we don't talk about hard things. And nobody talked to me about what I experienced and what I witnessed. And when I just continued to be sad, and what I felt like was, oh, Sally's too sad for everyone's liking.
Mm.
So instead of talking to me about it or taking me to someone else who would talk to me about it, they took me to a psychiatrist. I saw him one time. And I told him my story, and he prescribed me medication, and I never saw him again.
Wow.
I see now that that is not the way to do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mhm. I was on a path of pushing down the bad things. It was just how I was raised. I don't do that anymore, and it has taken a lot of unlearning.
Mhm.
So that depressive event was from a traumatic event, but then when I was 20, I didn't have a traumatic event. My medication just stopped working,
Mhm. Mhm.
which a lot of us that have been on this antidepressant journey know that feeling, that
Yes.
after a while, something that used to work doesn't seem to be working.
Mhm.
And so I changed medications at that time. And then when I was 27, I had another traumatic event, which was my biological father killed himself. And I wasn't okay.
Yeah.
And I did pursue therapy at that time. I did group therapy, which was really impactful and the best thing I did for that.
Mm. Wow.
Um, and I changed medication at that time too. And then when I was 38, my medication stopped working.
Mhm.
And then the 5th, depressive episode was when I was 42. I'm 43 now, and every single time I've gone through that, I have gone through the medication dance, which is not fun, it's hard. Oh my god. A nurse one time, I just had to get into the doctor, I didn't care who I saw, and I was like, "Help," you know? And she actually said to me, she goes, "Okay, well, what do you wanna take?"
Oh, wow.
I was shocked. I was like, "I don't fucking know. I'm not a professional,
Like,
help."
what?
Yeah.
What? Oh, wow.
Ugh, and I really had to take, the reins of my mental wellness. I
Mhm.
do have a lot of great help right now. I have a great therapist, and I have a psychiatrist that I really appreciate, but I have had over the years to really take control of understanding what medications do and don't work for me,
Mhm.
what other therapies do and do not work for me, and I've had to, like, solve this riddle of myself.
Mhm. Well, and if I could just because I think it's so important when you talk about the medication change and taking the reins yourself, I have had to adjust my medication, a couple times as well, and one of the biggest changes that I ended up making was no longer seeing a primary care doctor for my antidepressants, and it's no knock on them, but
Yep,
primary care doctors are trying to be jack of all trades,
yep.
and so I had an experience in 2016 where because I was having restless leg syndrome,
Mhm.
my primary care started to wean me off my antidepressant. And so she weaned it down to a really low dose. And then I didn't go back because I was frustrated
Yeah.
with how that was playing out. But I stepped away, and what happened was I ended up on a not therapeutic dose, and it was not a good scene for me. I was able to switch to a psychiatrist who adjusted my medication. He adjusted the dose, but then he added a medication to it. So now I take
Mhm,
two,
mhm,
and I meet with him every 3 months. It's just a 15-minute meeting, but I
mhm.
now have somebody who that's all he does. He's in touch with me enough that if I am struggling, that I have an option. And so I'm really glad that you said that about taking the reins of your own health. So if you're out there considering finding someone who focuses on that can be really helpful.
I totally agree. Kim, I had a very similar experience. I saw my PCP. I felt like my medication wasn't working. It's the time that someone said, "Oh, what do you wanna take?"
Right.
Um, which is stupid. I don't think they tapered me off of the medication that didn't work and then put me on this medication that also didn't work, and so I was just raw dog in life. I went through suicidal ideation at that time. And
Mhm.
it was terrible. I went through trying to find a therapist. I was in between therapists at that moment, and that is not an easy thing to do, unfortunately. And I found a psychiatrist for the first time in my adult life. And luckily, I was able to get stabilized after that. But I saw my PCP. They did not take care of me in the way that was necessary for me, and it became dangerous.
One of the times that I experienced suicidal ideation was when my medication was, was not adjusted appropriately for
Yeah.
me. So yeah.
Well, I'm really sorry that you have gone through suicidal ideation.
Likewise, because it's a tough place for anybody to be. Yeah.
Yeah. The way that I described it to my husband was that it was like a painless daydream,
Mm,
because when I was thinking about how I didn't want to be around anymore because it was too painful,
mm,
that daydream was painless, and it was the only time I had felt pain-free
mm.
in a while, and I left that painless daydream and went back to my terrible reality,
Yeah.
and that is fucking hard,
Mhm. Mhm.
and I'm very glad that I did. I don't wish any of this on anyone, and I have lost 2 people very important to me to suicide.
Mhm. Yeah. Intense is an understatement for it. And you
Mm,
found a way, right? You found a way to keep showing up for life even though it felt awful, right?
yeah,
Like, that persistence part of the equation is, being persistent enough to show up when it's so painful.
yeah, and
Yeah.
it was my people that brought me back. It was thinking about my kids and my husband and not being able to let them down like that.
Mhm.
It wasn't because I
Mhm.
wanted to be here,
Right. Right.
and connection is a protective measure
Mhm.
against mental illness. I
Mhm.
talked about that in my last episode about friendship, is that good connection, good friendships are a protective measure against mental illness, and I have experienced that through my life.
Yeah, and when one of the things that you most wanna do is isolate,
Yeah.
um, it is it's crucial. I remember so when I was in New Mexico, I had reached out to my therapist and shared a little bit about what I was going through, and her advice was to act against it, and I can remember calling up one of my friends at the time and saying, "Hey, Michelle, I've just been really depressed, and I don't feel like doing anything, but my therapist says I should. So, do you want to go to the moose with me?" And she was like, "Well, that's a ringing, invitation right there." But she was like, "Yes, absolutely." And making that phone call
Mhm.
basically was playing the opposite game. And again, this is not depending on where you're at. This can feel
Mhm.
like an insurmountable thing to do. I just
Mhm.
want to
Right.
name that. But calling her up, owning how I felt, knowing that she was listening, and having her help get me out of the house, and say, "I know you don't feel like it, but this is really important," and it made a difference in how I felt, and I believe it. It was that advice that I was able to find a way to implement, periodically that's been really, really helpful. Yeah.
That's really wonderful advice. I also isolate myself. I call it turtling,
Mhm.
and I know I'm not doing okay when I'm like, "Oh, I have put my head back in my shell. I am isolating," because depression lies, and depression
Mhm.
tells me that I'm not fun to be around, that I'm not funny, that people don't like me. And I listen, and when I'm depressed, I don't have the capacity to say, "That's bullshit. My people love me." And I did wanna talk about, like, how do you know you're depressed?
Mm.
And also, what are the good things that you do for yourself when you realize that you're not doing well?
So we talked about isolation, like self-isolating. One of the things that you said earlier, and I made a note of it because I sometimes forget this, but the emotional reactivity. I am really irritable when I am depressed. Like, I'm a dick.
I'm a
If I
monster.
ever like the times that I've, like, not filled my like, not been responsible about my medication and let it go for a couple days, it's not hard to tell because and I know I'm being a dick, and I'm like, "I don't really care." That can be a tell for me. You said depression lies, and I think that's so important to remember because the things that you're telling yourself about yourself, you're like, I mean, I went through this when I was coaching. So after I'd found I found what I wanted to do and I found my calling and I'd landed there and I was like, "Oh my gosh, like why am I still struggling?" Like I thought this was part of the
Mm.
missing piece of what happiness was, finding a purpose, like how important that is. But I was still like not feeling like a very good coach. Again, I mentioned like that the inability to concentrate, like for it taking 3 times and 4 times as long to
Yes.
get things done, because everything it's that moving through quicksand, I think is one of the ways I described it, and one of the first times that I really realized that I needed to go on medication, actually, I'd gone out for a run, so I was a runner at the time, I've always worked out. Running, it was really interesting, but through my 20s especially, running kept me from thinking I was depressed because how can you be depressed if you can run 7 miles and 8 miles in time? I mean, I was running a lot. Well, one day I went out for a run and I felt like I was wearing every piece of winter clothing that I had,
Mm.
like that heavy physical weight and like taking a step just took just tremendous effort. And I ended up bagging. I was like a half mile in and I turned around and I walked back to the house and I laid on the couch for the rest of the day and I was self-loathing and nothing's ever going to change and why am I even here and just that sort of space. And so variations of that when I've had major depressive episodes, it's been variations of those elements for me.
I make all the bad choices when I
Mhm.
am depressed. So, isolate myself, bad choice. Overeat, bad choice. Underexercise, bad choice. Overdrink, yep. So, and I call it filling the wrong hole
Mm. Yeah.
when it's really my heart that needs to be filled. It's not my mouth.
Mhm.
I made a list for myself of things that always make me feel better.
Yes.
Right? And I lean on these things. A few things that make me always feel better is a shower.
Yes.
Yeah. Talking with a good friend, going for a walk, being in nature, including the ocean. I'll talk about showers again later. I'm gonna tell a story around that. But Kim, will you share your perspective on showers? You have a really interesting perspective there.
Yeah, well, that's, I'm looking like the mental things list of things that make you feel better, and I do wanna note there that, one of the last times I had, like it was like a 2 or 3 week, period of depression, I had that list of things that I would do that usually made me felt better, and they weren't helping as much. I
Mm.
mean, it was good that I was doing them, but they weren't helping as much. That was also one of the ways that I knew that I was in a different place, at that point. I've always had the need to shower at the end of the day I always called it washing my day off. One of the things that I've learned in recent years is that I'm an empath. So there's a book out there called The Empath Survival Guide by Dr. Judith Orloff. In this book, one of the things that she talked about was that empaths really need to shower because they feel like they pick up everybody else's stuff. For me, it got increasingly more necessary to shower when I started working in a gym and I was interacting with hundreds of people every day. And I called myself a lint roller for human emotion because it wasn't just my emotions, but I was just like picking up everything everybody else was feeling. And so at the end of the day, the only thing that made me feel like I could reset and go to bed was to take a shower. And as a quick side note, if that resonates with you, one of the techniques that she mentions in the book, if you can't, because not all of us can go take a shower after every meeting that we have when somebody pisses us off, but you can run your hands under hot water. And so that is something that I would do.
I think that's really cool.
Yeah.
Showers always make me feel better, and once you told me that, I was like, "Cool."
Hmm.
I knew it, man.
Right, right. Very satisfying. You're like, "Oh, that's a thing. It's really it's a tool." Yeah.
It is a tool, and
Mhm.
over the years, I have made my own toolbox of
Mm.
things that make me feel better, and ways that I stay well, which is important. So let's talk about getting well. I'll start. I have tried almost everything.
Mhm.
I have taken 7 different antidepressants.
Yeah, wow.
I have been in therapy for 10 years. I
Mhm.
journal. I journal so much. Since 2015, I have filled 21 journals.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Wow. That's
yeah.
impressive.
Last year, I filled 5 journals.
Wow.
It's one of the ways
Wow.
that I process.
Mhm. Which is great, yeah.
I've done EMDR, I've done internal family systems, meditation. I go to the woods, for a solo weekend every year, sometimes twice. I have done crystals, Reiki, breath work, acupuncture, psychedelics. I have tried almost everything, and I'm happy to say I am okay right now. I am not depressed right now, and it was a long walk, and it took a lot, and my cure, which this is my recipe, it's not everybody's recipe, but my recipe was I did traditional and non-traditional therapies. So the traditional was talk therapy, a little less traditional is EMDR, which is an acronym that I never remember what it means, but it's a way of processing trauma.
It's like rapid eye movement,
Yeah,
something, yeah.
eye movement DR.
Rapid yeah. Google
I'll
it,
remember.
yeah.
It's cool. Internal family systems, and the non-traditional therapies is psychedelics. I used therapeutic ketamine to get well, and it was hugely impactful, and actually my next episode is a deep dive into therapeutic ketamine. And in addition to those things, I also started doing some somatic practices. So another word for somatic is embodiment, and it wasn't something that I even knew existed 2 years ago. I didn't understand it, and since then, I have done transformational breath work. I have used acupuncture, singing, dancing,
Mm.
exercise. So being in my body, that processes trauma, that processes stress, that gets it out of you. And I did a lot of processing too, a lot of processing. So all of those journals, those 21 journals, talk therapy and friendship, talking with my girlfriends. I'm a
Mhm.
verbal processor is something that
Mhm.
I have learned, and talking about things truly does make me feel better. And I can get some of that through journaling as well, and I do that. All of this took a lot of time and a lot of rest, and I had to be gentle with myself.
Mhm.
Rest is not something that we afford ourselves.
No.
We and I had to, and that was hard. I didn't know how to stop. Well,
Oh,
and I
sure.
call that toxic productivity.
Yes, that's exactly what it is, yes.
Ugh,
Yeah.
I had to give up that. I had to give up toxic productivity, and I also needed a lot of support emotionally and frankly financially because I couldn't work as much, and also those therapies that I have done, they're not free.
Mhm.
And I acknowledge my privilege. Not everyone can do some of the things that I've done, and I hate that. I hate that for our world. I hate that therapy isn't very accessible for many different reasons, but I have been fortunate enough to have the support of my amazing, hot mister and my true friends who loved me through my messy middle, which I was
Mhm.
deeply messy for a while.
Mhm.
And I also had to remove some toxins from my life, and those were alcohol,
Mhm.
bad friends, a
Mhm.
bad boss,
Mhm.
and all of those things put together, which is a huge list. I finally got out of a constant trauma response.
Mm.
What? I didn't know this. I did not know that I was having all of these triggers, like, all these things that doesn't to other people looks like not a big deal, setting down a plate hard. Little things that are innocuous to others can put you right back, put your body and your mind right back in an awful thing that you lived through, and then your good brain turns off, your lizard brain turns on, and you
Mhm.
are in flight, flight, freeze, fawn, and I did not know that I was in so many trauma responses,
Mhm.
and I'm not anymore, and I am finally feeling alive in my own life.
That's amazing. That's
Mm.
amazing, and a lot of work. Kudos to you for putting in that work. We've talked about that before, but kudos to you for putting in that work because it's a lot of work.
Thank you, and I don't tend to give myself a lot of credit for it because I feel like it wasn't optional. I didn't I didn't have a lot of other options. I just everything sucked real
Mhm.
bad for me for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah,
I
you
had
can get sick and tired of being sick and tired,
Yeah,
sometimes.
and I'm the type of person that takes action.
Yeah.
And it's very hard to take action when you're depressed. It is
Mhm.
nearly impossible. Like you said, it's like walking through quicksand. Our capacity is just lower,
Mhm.
and it is a very, very hard thing to do, and
Mhm.
I'm glad I was able to.
You know, what that makes me think of is that one of the things that I will talk about with clients, and you're familiar with it, is the domino habit, and I think
Mm.
for me that when I'm depressed, that is, exercise, and there's actually some great, research out there on the impact of there's a book called Spark, it's written by an MD, and it's about the impact of exercise on depression, but for me, if I can get out and get some exercise in, whether that's a walk, and it takes on different forms. That's the thing too, is like be a walk. If I'm really depressed, it might be a walk or play. I mean, maybe it's, playing a sport or whatever that might be. But what I find is that exercise can often help domino some other things because I will feel slightly better. And so sleep is a big thing to focus
Yep,
on, getting enough sleep, but then not sleeping too much, right? Which is another, can be a side effect for some people,
yep,
is sleeping too much.
mhm,
Proper nutrition, making sure your body is getting enough nutrients in, which can also be a struggle. I tend to lose my appetite when I'm depressed, so it can be a struggle to want to eat anything. But so getting enough, nutrition in, meditation, you said, I think that's something else that I've used that can be, that has been a tool for me in the past. Massage, you said acupuncture, actually massage, just the physical touch.
yep,
I know some people can't tolerate that or they have a hard time with that, and I understand that. For me, though, massage has been really helpful in that holistic approach. And then you talked about community, which is the same too. Like the last time I got pretty depressed, I had a really good friend that I told about it. I told her how I was feeling, and she checked in with me every day. That was that was part of what she did, was just like, "How's today?" And I didn't have to show up in a certain way. I could show up however I was feeling, which I think it was really important. And then therapy, you talked about, and specifically EMDR. I'm actually in the middle. The therapist that I'm working with now does a lot of EMDR, and I've called it sort of nervous system work. You talked
mhm,
about embodying, but one of the things that you might find if you've done a lot of talk therapy is that you've analyzed things as much. You're in your head. You've analyzed. You're aware. You learn, like, now you need to, like you said, embody some of those changes, right? Like recognizing what your body's response. When does your body not feel safe? Are there some steps that you can take to help move it into a place of of safety, but really paying attention to it from a nervous system perspective and not just the intellectual perspective itself.
that's awesome. Yeah, depression makes me fat.
Mm,
It so for you, it decreases your appetite. For me, it increases my
mhm,
appetite, and I'm more susceptible to binge eating and drinking. And I had to change my relationship with alcohol to
mhm,
get well. I didn't mention that, but something else that I did to get better was cut down my drinking. And I have a great psychiatrist, and she told me, and you know what? You're going to get me if you have science behind you. If you have data, you're going to get me. I'm a nerd. And she referenced multiple studies. Kim, you and I know that alcohol is a depressant.
mhm.
And I couldn't care about that when I was depressed. It was like a mental vacation. And I was
Yeah,
like, my
numb.
life
You wanna be
sucks.
numb. Yeah.
Yes. Oh, totally, the numbing out that I would do that I didn't really realize, and I thought, "Oh, I deserve this. Everything sucks. I deserve this." But it was numbing, it was a mental vacation. So she informed me with science that depressed adult women should have 3 or fewer alcohol drinks a week,
Mhm,
and I had never heard it that way. I
Mm.
had previously had a psychiatrist who just told me, "You should cut back on drinking or you should stop drinking."
Mhm.
And that was it. He just why? Just because? Like, I was like, "Well, fuck you anyway."
Mhm.
You don't know me. You don't know me. But she gave me a good reason and a helpful framework. 3
Mm.
drinks a week? Sure. That lets me do some social drinking
Mhm.
without having to go overboard, and it didn't I didn't have to stop all the way, and it was really helpful, and I have been doing that for over a year, 3 or
Mm.
fewer drinks a week,
Mhm.
and I was like, "This is something I can do. This is me taking action." I was like, "That is
Mhm.
something I can do to make myself feel better. Thank you for the information."
Mm. Yeah, absolutely. Specifics always help, right? Like,
Yeah,
specifics just in general when you're trying to make any kind of change, like, it's because it's quantifiable, right? It
yeah,
makes it much more quantifiable. Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
So, I wanted to share, I feel silly. Um, I have invented I call it my 4 pillars of wellness.
Yes!
Nerd.
Love a good
So,
pillar.
the last time I went away on my, cabin in the woods, off-grid weekend by myself, I did a lot of journaling, and I found 4 things that I need to be okay. Those 4 things are embodiment, connection, creativity, and downtime. And so for me, embodiment, it's like this train propelling me forward. It is like churning through things and processing. And it's like how I survive and evolve. And it gets the trauma or whatever, the stress out of my body, which is something if you have read Burnout,
Mm. Oh
if you've read
gosh.
the book
One of
Burnout,
the best books out there.
such a good book, really eye-opening for me, and they talked about stress stays in your body, and I've also read trauma stays in your body, and, somatic practices, embodiment practices, get it the fuck out of your body.
Mhm.
So, that's embodiment for me. Connection, it adds energy, and it fights loneliness for me, and
Mm.
for me, it's a power up.
Yeah.
And I have to also admit, I'm an extrovert, so I get my energy from other people, and so
Mm.
that's part of it for me. And then downtime is recovery, it's rest, it's recharge. I hadn't been honest with myself about how much downtime I actually needed. I was just go, 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 toxic productivity, and was not resting enough for what my system actually needs. And then creativity, it's the sparkle, and you might think that's optional. It's not fucking optional. It
Mhm.
isn't for me, and it's flavor. Like, you wouldn't make a meal without adding any spice,
Mhm.
and it makes life worth living, and I have a lot of passion projects right now, and this is one of them. This podcast is one of them, and, I have a lot of things that I do for creativity. I'm in a band, and I do some arts and crafts, and I do all kinds of silly things that get my creativity going, and those 4 things, embodiment, connection, creativity, downtime, that's how I'm staying okay right now. I made a printout as a reminder, like, it's ADHD friendly because if it's out of sight, it's out of mind, and it's really important to me to be okay. And so if I have a week where I didn't talk with, people enough, and connection isn't just, like, good friends. I had a friend refer to it as micro connections,
'Kay.
and that's like having a cute little chat in the grocery store line.
Ah,
Right?
yes.
And
Yeah.
that does work for me, like, I love that, that boosts me up. And so just being creative about, like, how I can get these things into my life so that I can do everything else, and I can take care of myself, and I can take care of everybody else. Those are my 4 pillars of wellness.
Yeah, I love it.
The other name I gave it was Sally's algorithm of happiness.
Oh, there you go. I like that better. I think I
Do
like that
you?
better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I happiness algorithm.
Happiness algorithm. There you go.
Yeah,
It's the name
that's
of your
nerdy.
next
I'm
book.
I'm a
Yeah,
nerd.
that's good. Yeah, nerd it up. That's good. I like that.
Let's nerd it up. That's what I wanted to I mean, I have a lot more to say about depression, but those were, like, the big points that I wanted to talk about. Is there anything else you'd like to add that we didn't say?
No, I think like you said, there's a lot to be said on the topic, and I don't think we can talk about it enough. Because I think that, like I said at the beginning, even though I feel like it's better than it was, I've been very public. So I keep a blog at kimberlyfitness.com, and I was public about my depression for the first time in 2016, and I wrote an article about it, and the reaction I got was pretty intense, and it was in part because it's just not not talked about enough. So I thank you for tackling the topic and being willing to, to be public about it and to dedicate one of your first podcast episodes to the topic. So thank you for having me.
Thanks. I appreciate that about you. I appreciate your openness overall, and so appreciate that you are open about depression and anxiety and have been. And that's part of your story and it's part of who you are. And I admire that. And I am really grateful that you joined me today to talk about this. And I really appreciate your vulnerability and your sharing so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Glad I could be here.
I want to add a little lightness here, and I'd like to share a story. So this is story time with your gal pal Sal, but I wanted to share this thing that I invented. Ooh, I call it Lovely Shower. We already talked about showers, how they make you feel better. Ho, ho, ho. Dude, take your shower to the next level. So, what is necessary to make a lovely shower is you must have privacy. That
Hmm.
means no interruptions. No one's gonna come into the bathroom and be like, "Mom, where's the toothpaste?" No, no interruptions. Also important, you must have no time limit,
Mm.
okay? And I know that one is a little bit hard. I have time-based anxiety, so if I know I need to be somewhere later, like, I'm not gonna enjoy my lovely shower as much.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
So those 2 things are a must-have. Let me explain a lovely shower. It is a full sensory event. So, shut the door on the bathroom. I'm in there alone, and it starts with the lighting. And I bring down the lights to low lights, which I really like low lights, and I burn incense or candles. So we've got the visual. It's nice and low lights and soft lighting. Ooh. And then you have the smells, lovely incense that I really love that I burn every time. And then you have the sounds. So I put on music that I like. And it's
Mm.
usually dancey music and or singing music.
Mm.
Also, I can sing as loud as I want during lovely shower. I have the approval of my family.
Oh, good. Okay, I love that. Good. That's great.
I It's more fun for me if they're not in the house, but whatever, I'll take what I can get. So I've set the stage, the low lights, the great smell, the good music, and then I get into the shower and I am dancing safely, all right? It's a little slippery in there.
Mm.
And I'm singing for sure. I love to sing. Singing is really healthy for you. It's really amazing for your system. It's magic. And I take my time and I, like, shampoo my hair with, again, good smells, this really lovely smelling shampoo. I have fancy ass bar soap that I love. I shave my legs and I use, really nice shower gel. That's an important part of it too. That's the touch. So,
Mm.
it's like a sensory thing to get your legs all just like, "Ooh, wowee," soft and hair-free. And I just enjoy myself and I'm very present. I will
Mm.
also say I often incorporate cannabis. So that also helps me be very present and in my body and able to just enjoy. And so
Nice.
I sing at the top of my lungs, I take my time, and then when I get out of the shower, lovely shower is not over, okay?
Oh.
Now, still touch, that's the scent that we're going with. I apply body oil all over my body. And so these fresh shaven legs, I apply this body oil. And Also, I'm kind of giving myself a massage at this point, right? Like, I'm rubbing
Yeah.
it in, and I'm still singing, and I'm still having an awesome time, and that is lovely shower, and it is amazing, and the spell is broken when you open the door and walk out of the shower, or if someone knocks on the door and asks you where the toothpaste is. I think it is a really accessible way that you can feel amazing, and I love lovely shower. I try to take one at least once a week.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I'm a little bit as someone who does not have children, I'm like, "Oh, somebody could interrupt your your shower." I'm like, "What? That could happen? Of
You
course it could happen, Kim. Of course it could."
you lucky bitch.
Yeah, I know, right?
Evil, evil. Okay, so that was story time with, your gal pal Sal. I like to finish our episodes with, sharing something that's currently bringing us joy. So, Kim, do you have something, anything that is currently making you happy?
Well, I got, as a gift so you're talking about music, I got as a gift for my birthday, which was a couple months ago, an electric guitar from my brother and my parents as a gift, and so I have been spending some time learning. I have an acoustic guitar, as well, so that has brought me joy, and I would say also so I'm working on a book right now, and I have a deadline coming up, so I've definitely been spending a lot of time. I have not been very balanced in that approach because 'cause I'm a procrastinator, which, story for another day. But one of the other things that brings me joy is sports ball, as you call it, and so taking time out to watch the NFL playoffs, and then baseball is right around the corner, and I'm a huge baseball fan, and I it's one of the places that I find I can stay present. People are like, "It's like watching paint dry," and I'm like, "Yes, it's amazing." And
Aw.
so right now reading about my team, and things like that. So sports ball brings and I should actually say the last one is my dogs. I think that for me having so I have two basset hounds, and one of the things that you do, and I notice my wife does it too because she works from home, is that periodically throughout the day you just sit down and you pet your dog. You pet them and you talk silly to them, and it just always it fills my heart. So those are some of the things that bring me joy. Yes.
That's that's dopamine. Animals are
Hmm.
great for that.
Oh gosh, yeah. Yes, they are.
Okay, my share is I am so excited. I am building a lady lounge in my house.
Yeah. When does
So
that
I
open? Yeah.
as soon as I can do this, I negotiated with my husband. I get the basement, and I am going to make a lady lounge down there, and it is gonna be my creativity space, and I am
Oh,
so stoked. I am so
yes.
stoked.
Is it gonna have a neon sign that says Lady Lounge? Because it should. That's totally what popped into my mind.
Maybe, sure, I don't know yet. I really want a disco ball pretty bad. I have karaoke set up in my basement. I can do karaoke with a microphone at all times. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's great.
How silly. I love it. It's something else that's bringing me joy and filling my cold black heart. JK.
Go Black Heart.
Oh my gosh. The messages that I have received from friends across the nation that listened to my first episode, I am blown over. I have received
Mm,
such lovely, wonderful messages. I'm just so surprised that people will give an hour of their time. It is filling my heart.
I love that. I love that. That's fantastic. Good for you.
Yeah.
I
Thanks.
love that.
Thank you. Again, thank you for being here. I enjoyed this conversation, which is hard to say when you're talking about a hard topic, right?
Mhm. Yes, likewise, I enjoyed it, and yes, that's not always easy to say when you're talking about
Yeah.
something like that, yeah.
Good job, us.
Good job, us, that's right, pat on the back.
Thank you so much, Kim. Thank you so much for being here, joining me today, sharing, being vulnerable. I'm so grateful. And big thank you to any listeners who have made it this far, who have tuned into this topic and made it to the end. I appreciate you. I hope that you got something out of this. I did. And if you liked what you heard, please subscribe so you can catch all my next episodes. Please tell your friends. I want to make this a party. So please share, listen. I love it. And until next time, this is your gal pal Sal, and you are listening to Chin Hairs and F Bombs.